Welcome to another edition of Impactful Conversations. My name is Andy Vaughn. I'm the president and CEO of Alliant International University. And with me today is one of our very own Board of Trustees members, Dr. Lawrence Moore. Lawrence, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andy. Mighty proud to be here.
So you've been a board member, I think, what, 8-9 years now? Is that correct?
About 8 years, yeah. It's amazing.
Tell me, what inspired you to join the Board of Trustees at our university?
Well, you did, to be perfectly honest.
Me?
Yes, go figure. We go back a long way. You were getting your feet under you at Alliant, as you have with other professional undertakings. We've discussed them in our social interactions, and you were telling me about the challenges and the opportunities that come with working with two boards, a board of trustees and a board of directors. And so I would occasionally offer up some insights in that, having served on a number of boards and having served on a number of board staffs. It sort of gives me a perspective there. And one day you said, I think you'd do well on our board. And I went, okay, let's go with that. And 8 years later, here we are.
And the board thought so too. They loved you right away, and it was a no-brainer to have you join. And we're so thankful you have and continue to serve us. So thank you for that. Your background made it very easy, but also your personality and everything you've done in your career and personally, a great success story. You've been an executive at Motorola. You got your PhD from Northwestern University, and I believe you were a faculty member for a while. You've got the academic background, the corporate background. It was just a perfect fit for us. Tell us about your career and how it shaped you for what you do today with our board.
Well, as strange as it may sound, my career was not a rocky road, but a sort of curved line toward where I am now, but yet it all seems to come together rather nicely. I started out, as you alluded to, in education. I was a college professor for 10 years. Part of that, yes, I was at Northwestern and did some teaching there during my year's residency on campus. So that gave me the passion for higher education and the experience in higher education. As I moved from that primarily to go on to some new challenges, because I had accomplished everything I thought I was going to where I was teaching, I moved back to Arizona for the next chapter, and there were no teaching positions. So I wound up going to work for the state for a while, and I was recruited from there to do community relations for a local bank. And community relations meant that I was tasked with making sure the bank understood how its various constituent groups were relating to the organization. And that was in what's known as public relations at the time. So I was there. I began to get involved in that and later moved to Motorola, where I was the senior director for communications and marketing. And all of that also included what we called at that time stakeholder relations. So all the various groupings of people who interacted with the corporation, were affected by the corporation. I had goals set as to how well we should relate to those various groups. So that sort of made coming to Alliant a natural, because once I joined the board, I brought that perspective to everything I do.
Let's talk about what shaped you from a young boy to where you are today, though. You were born before the Civil Rights Act of '64 in a small rural town in Arizona. And I know many of these stories, but I think they're so compelling. Matter of fact, you should write a book, by the way, about everything in your life. It's just really compelling to everyone that hears about your stories. Tell us about what it was like growing up as an African-American boy in a small rural town in Arizona before the Civil Rights Act and even after, and how that impacted you and shaped who you are today.
Wow. Well, it's hard to encapsulate that in a few words, but I think if I think back to that little boy living in that rural town in very conservative Arizona, raised by parents who came from the South, where pre-civil rights movement was especially challenging. If I were to think of one phrase that sort of sums that up, is my view of the world was a line often said by my elders. It's a white man's world. We're just living in it. And so that's how I viewed initially the world around me. I went where I was allowed to go, spoke with people that were willing to speak to me and didn't speak when I got signals that wasn't going to happen. And I was always told that means you just have to work that much harder to succeed. So when I started school and I started growing up, those phrases resonated with me. You're going to have to work twice as hard as the white kids in your class, but only expect to get half as far. That sounds like it would be depressing, but it wasn't. It was okay. I now understand the lay of the land. This is how I'm going to work it. I wasn't resentful. It was a fact of life, and I tried to deal with it.
At one point in your schooling, K-12, either a teacher or a guidance counselor came to you about what you were going to do after you graduated high school. And it's not quite what you had in mind. And I think they really undershot where you could go. Would you be willing to share that story? And by the way, when you graduated with your PhD from a very well-known, prestigious global university at Northwestern in Chicago, I'm just curious if that teacher or guidance counselor ever learned about your success. I would love to know that part of the story too.
Well, when you're in junior high, you take a series of aptitude tests, and then your guidance counselors look at that and advise you on how they think it's best for you to go forward. And to be perfectly honest, I had no idea what I could or couldn't do or would or wouldn't do. Remember, I'm still living in a white man's world, and my guidance counselors were white. So they were going to let me know, based on the tests, what would be best for me. They didn't say what I couldn't do, but they said, you're getting ready to go to high school. As we look at your scores, you would probably do well in retail. And so we're not going to put you in a college prep track. We're going to put you in a general track. And once again, I accepted that. Okay, I'll probably go into retail. I didn't miss being in college prep at that time. That wasn't for me. I was told by people who know that that wasn't for me. So I didn't feel like I was being cut off from anything. It was just, that was the world, and I moved forward with it. So I really didn't have a sense that I would go to college until I started getting scholarship offers. Little background, I was in music activities. I sang in what was known as all-state chorus, which meant I was amongst the top singers in the state, ranked very high amongst those top singers. So other schools, I guess, got my name and started sending me scholarship offers. And I'm going, the college will pay you to go sing? Wow. So I did, and I applied, and I got accepted to a number. And I was thinking at the time, but they said I wasn't college material. That's interesting. So I set that aside, accepted a new reality, and went on into higher education, achieving my bachelor's, master's, and ultimately my doctorate. And I have thought about that, counselor, from time to time.
Oh, I'm sure.
I have no idea whether they ultimately became aware or, I was just another kid for them. They might not even remembered how they advised me.
So at some point, you went into the U.S. Navy, and I believe you became a Russian linguist.
Correct.
Spent a lot of time in Russia during the Cold War. Tell us about that, but also that is the pathway where you eventually met your future husband, Rick. And I believe you've been together now 55 years. Is that right?
Correct. 55 years.
That's an amazing story in itself. We could do a whole podcast just on that. Tell us about your military experience. How did that happen, and what did you learn, and what were the experiences from serving during the Cold War in the U.S. military?
Well, this was Vietnam era. There was a draft, and so I got a deferment from the draft to complete my bachelor's degree, which I did. I thought I'd be able to sweet talk the lady at the draft board to let me go on and get my master's, since, I was doing so well. She said, no, you're going to get drafted. So I was not really anxious to go and shoot at people or be shot at by people. It was a war in which I did not believe. I thought we had no business over there. However, I'm a citizen. I pay my taxes. And when called to serve, I go and serve. But I enlisted instead of waiting for them to draft me, because I found out that if you enlist, you get an opportunity potentially to go to a school. And I thought, I can get some education out of this, on Uncle Sam. It might not be all bad. And the longer I'm in school, the less likely I'll be shot at. So I joined the United States Navy, and there, once again, you take a battery of aptitude tests. And I guess I really rocked the foreign language aptitude, because they came to me and said, wow, we want to send you to foreign language school. And I went, sounds good to me. So military selects your languages, but they did ask, if you had a choice, what language would you choose? Now, a lot of my friends who had music backgrounds, especially singing, would choose French, German, or Italian, because we all had to sing in those languages. And I thought, if I really did that well on the aptitude test, they're not going to let me take one of those languages. So I asked for Russian.
Huh? All right.
My friends who asked for French, German, and Italian all got North Vietnamese.
Okay.
Selected for them. I got my wish and I got Russian. So I wound up going to language school for 9 months and studying the Russian language. That was my duty, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, complete with homework and all of that. And then I was stationed outside of Tokyo. And there, in that unit, which was an Air Force base where I was stationed. So I was part of an Air Force squadron, part of a small Navy contingent. And working in the same spaces with me was Rick Hubbard, whom I met, got to know, got to love, and established a relationship in 1970 that has lasted till this day.
That in itself is an amazing story. So just by itself, the fact that you're in a 55-year successful relationship, we could do a whole show just on that. We probably should actually. But tell us about how you and Rick met and how that shaped you as an adult today.
Well, as I mentioned, we met at work. His cubicle was just down the room from mine. So I first saw him, thought he looked adorable, started talking to him. And the more I talked, the more I liked. He just has this simple sort of no nonsense, what you see is what you get aspect of him. Scary bright, very intelligent, and was a challenge to me on so many levels in that regard because I grew because of what he brought to conversations and his insights into the world and that. So it wasn't long before we were hanging out together all the time, the best of friends before any romance entered into anything. Because in the military, you couldn't do that.
At least not in 1970, no.
No. And so you had to be really careful. I had to be really careful. Rick was naive about the whole thing. He hadn't a clue what was on my mind for the longest time. So I needed to be really careful because I didn't know he was engaged, in point of fact, to a high school sweetheart back home in Greenville, Pennsylvania. I was going, well, this is not going to go anywhere fast. But ultimately, we found a way to get a romance started, even in the military. And the fates combined to allow him a way out of his marriage that would not embarrass his small town sweetheart. And then we made a commitment to be together, and we've stayed together ever since.
So let's pause for a moment, though. So 1970, very different time in this country for being gay, in the military, in a small town. That's got to be tough. And on top of that, this is a Caucasian male with an African-American male. And in 1970, that was, correct me if I'm wrong, there were some states that wouldn't allow that, at least not for marriage. Is that right?
Well, of course, there was no same-sex marriage.
Correct.
And interracial marriage, heterosexual interracial marriage, had only recently been approved in the past 20 years. Lots of states had laws about that. There were plenty of states that had laws about being gay, so the marriage was not an issue. So it was more of a social thing. Most of our friends were white, and many of them looked askance at the two of us with a sort of, what do you two think you're doing? Some probably didn't approve, though they didn't state it out front. They would make jokes, either jokes about how I had married up as a social climber or about how he had lucked out because of mythologies about sexual endowment amongst African Americans. So those were crass sideline type statements they would make. Couldn't possibly be that we were just two human beings who met, became best friends, and fell in love. They had to find a way to trivialize that part of it in order to create this other. And that was mostly social. And then, of course, that extends to family issues, not mine, but his. They had an issue once they found out that he was gay and that I was his lover, with the fact that he was with a black man, and they made no bones about it. And that was unfortunate. I felt horrible being an element that would separate him from his family. The separation was not my asking. It was his choice to do. Those were the sorts of racial issues about being gay that we faced then. Occasionally, it still comes up now, but a lot less often.
Well, you have a lot of tenacity, and your ability just to rise above that is quite intriguing for me and for our audience, I know. How did that shape you? And by the way, your mother, very strong woman. I never got a chance to meet her, but I know a very strong woman. How did she uh, understand and accept? I don't know if you came out before she had passed or not, and what was her take on that?
My mother probably gave me the best gift that any human being could give another beyond the gift of life, which of course was significant. But her whole attitude about me and all of her kids and the way life should be lived is one that made me comfortable in my skin. And because I'm comfortable in my skin, other people's discomfort doesn't really impact me that much. About what I do, maybe. About the quality of what I produce, absolutely. But about me as a human being, that's their right, and I tend to move on. So when it came to this aspect of my life, and I think, of course, you know, I had an older brother, 12 years older. He was gay. Now imagine, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. He was 12 years ahead of me in that same small town. My mother explained it to me and my other brother. She wasn't a very educated woman. She went to 7th grade. So her explanations were simple, straightforward. She sat the two of us down. She said, I just want you to know that in this world, most men like women, some men like other men. Your oldest brother likes other men. And she goes, he pays for the roof over his head. What he does under it is his business. And as long as I draw breath, you will respect him. And that was the end of the conversation. So I never had to think about how I would be accepted or how my situation. In fact, I always assumed she knew. She seemed to know everything. You know, the woman had eyes in the back of her head. She had sensors that stretched for hundreds of miles. She knew everything. She couldn't not know that. The point being is the way she raised me, she didn't get a vote. I was comfortable in my own skin. So
What a
worked out.
great story. What a great example of a great woman, too. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So flash forward about 10, 15 years from the time you met Rick in 1970. Another adversity as a gay man that you faced was the AIDS epidemic. And right around 82, 83, it really started breaking out. My guess is you probably lost dozens and dozens of friends. Some estimates say about half of all gay men that were active in the 80s and early 90s died during that time. How did that impact you and help shape you today?
That was, as you can imagine, a really troubling time. And I was blessed to be in a relationship at that point. So I was at less of a risk than other gays who were being sexually active. And there were just so many of my friends, literally, I mean, some of the closest amongst my friends, and you would just not know today whether they would be here in 6 months. Because when you were diagnosed back then with HIV, it was, in essence, a death sentence. And you weren't going to be around longer than 18 months following that diagnosis, and most weren't around that long. So it got to a point where I felt like I was going to a funeral or hearing about someone's death 2 or 3 days a week. And it was easy to just fall into depression. Like, why is the world looking at people like me and crushing us? And at that time, our government didn't respond. In fact, it did just the opposite. So I'm not one that goes into depressions, but it was probably as close to a depressing period as I ever had in my life.
So take all these experiences in your background. I think we could do an individual show on each one of these elements of your life, but combine all of these things. You grow up as a young black man before the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act in 64. Not a whole lot changed right away. Over time, maybe more, but still not where it needs to be in all cases. You go through that experience. You're living in a small rural town in Arizona as a young gay black man. You meet your partner and future husband in 1970, a Caucasian male in a mixed race relationship in a small town in the 1970s. Very compelling. The AIDS epidemic hits about 10 years later. All these things helped shape you. How did all of these things combine then help shape you today to be a board member of Alliant University? And what do these experiences do for you today as an adult male?
Well, I think as with any human being, I am the sum total of my life's experiences. And so I bring a lot of that very varied experience with me to the board. I also bring the fact that I'm comfortable in my own skin, which means I'm really okay with everybody else being comfortable in their skin. Absolutely no problem at all coping with that, moving through relationships with that, looking at the world around me and all the perturbances that seem to be going on and saying, okay, but I face this from my perspective of being comfortable in my skin. I see person X doing that. Now we can find out how they can figure out if they're making other people uncomfortable in their skin and moving forward from that perspective. So what I hope it does for me as a board member at Alliant is that it makes me view the world through a lens that is accepting, through a lens that is inclusive, through a lens that is welcoming, and through a lens that allows the people around me to experience their lives and be themselves without any judgment coming from my direction. And if they realize those things are happening, then I'm doing something right.
What advice would you give to a young person, maybe thinking about finally coming out of the closet based on your experiences?
Wow. I think that it's got to be such a different journey for each individual, depending upon their surroundings, the kind of family, the kind of friends, the kind of religious background. I guess I would give them advice to be patient with themselves. You'll figure out the best way to come out. Lots of people may have opinions on what you should do, but you're the only one that knows inside what's going to work for you. It may not work for everyone else. They may not think you're doing it right, but you've got to know.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Putting all this together, then, the world is changing rapidly, faster than ever. It's subjective to whether that's good or bad, depending on who you are, where you sit, and your perspective. Not just higher education, but our world that's surrounding us today, especially in 2025. What advice can you give our viewers and listeners about how to navigate this rapid change? It makes some people excited, others are depressed. How do you put all that together? What do you tell someone that's struggling and wondering what to do next with all the changes that are happening, not just in the US, but globally? Where do we go with that? What's your advice to people on that?
I guess if I had some advice, I would say try to take the long view. The only constant in life really is change. Been on this planet 79 years, and it's been change, change, and more change. Most of it I've been fine with. Some of it I go, geez, what in the world is going on out there? But ultimately, things evolve, and at least in my life's experience, the aggregate, not all the details come out well, but the aggregate is a move in a positive direction. But it may not seem so at certain times. So change is to be expected. Human beings, by our nature, don't deal well with change. So if it upsets you, that's perfectly normal. And so take a deep breath, stand back, and take the long view.
Well, that's good advice, because I think most people realize that success and progress is not linear. You might take 10 steps forward and 12 back, and eventually, though, you look back in the long view, you are ahead in the long run. So that's great advice too. Speaking of change and evolution, the world of inclusion is changing. You are the chair of the Board of Trustees at Alliant University Inclusion and Community Affairs. Where is that going next?
Where it's going to go next, I hope, is for us to help the university community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and external entities who have an interest in our success, evolve a common vision about what inclusion and community relations means for Alliant. Because if we don't evolve a common vision, then we wind up setting ourselves up for disappointment, occasionally for surprises that are nice, but as often as not, disappointment. If we evolve a common vision, then we know where we're progressing. And we know, as you point out, success is not linear. We may take 2 steps forward and 1 to the side, 1 back, and go back forward again. But since we have a common vision of our destination, we know that we're progressing in the right direction and that we'll ultimately get there.
Excellent. Couple closing questions, if you have some more time.
Certainly.
One, what is the most, do you think, misunderstood part about you with other human beings? What do you think people misunderstand the most about you?
Well, I think the downside of being comfortable in my skin is that many see that as me lacking compassion, lacking empathy, and making me kind of come off as a distant and heartless person. do so. None of that is true, but I can see why people will look at my behavior. When other voices are being raised, mine tends to get tamped down. Things that really other people get passionate about, I nod my head and go, yeah, well, but take the long view. And so they think I lack that fire. It's just not very visible.
What would you like people to know most about you?
I'm just an ordinary human being who occasionally manages to do some extraordinary things. At the end of the day, I'm just a person who loves people.
Well put. Dr. Lawrence Moore, you are a trailblazer. I know you try to deny that every time I say it, but you are. You've paved the pathway for all kinds of different populations, intersectional populations across the globe. You really have. And I know you try to deny that and play that down, but the work you and others from generations before us have paved the way for the kind of life we have today, and even more important, the kind of life future generations will have. You broke down some barriers, some glass ceilings. You did that. And we have to recognize that. So we thank you for that. And you are indeed a trailblazer. That should be the name of your book, by the way. Just keep that in mind. I'm going to plug that again.
I'll keep that in mind.
Dr. Lawrence Moore, thank you for joining Impactful Conversations. I know this is impactful for our audience too. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.